So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being on today's call. I am Commissioner Remel Terry, and I'm joined by my lovely colleague, Commissioner Yvette Loizon. And so we're going to quickly go through the agenda for today and lay out some of the housekeeping for today's webinar. So you are here for the review of additional amendments to the CPD's policy around associations. And the outline for today's webinar is that we'll cover the commission policy making powers, because we always find that to be very important. We're going to give you insight again on policy development overview. We will go into the association's policy development and then additional changes to the policy. We'll talk a bit about policy implementation, and then we will wrap up with a bit of Q&A. So as it relates to housekeeping, please make sure you're using the question and answer feature to ask questions or provide comments, and staff will manage those questions and pose them to the commissioners. There is also a link to the current policy available to you all in the chat. So please feel free to pull it up and use it to guide any of the questions that you may have for this webinar. And we really want to thank all of those community members who are joining us today in this process for the first time, and to those who continue to show up and provide incisive input and ask those very important questions that we need. So we're going to over to our slide 4, where we're going to talk a little bit about our policy making powers as a commission. And so some of the things that's very important to note as it relates to our policy making powers is that any new or amended policy shall come before the commission, and it's only going to be effective after it is approved by the commission. So it doesn't mean that everyone will agree, but if it has majority vote, then that is approval by the commission. And it's really important that our authority, that you are aware, our authority is proposing, reviewing, amending, and deciding to enact policy for all CPD, COPA, and police board. And so a new policy may be initiated either by the department or any of the other agencies that we have oversight. And so again, we can propose policies, we can review the proposed policies by CPD, and then we have the authority to enact those policies if we get the majority vote. So if we go over to slide 6, it talks a little bit more about our policy development. And so I'll give you a quick overview. So we're a public safety entity, and or either a public safety entity will propose a policy and or revision, or CCPSA can also propose policy, which you all saw if you have been following our work around what was known as the criminal enterprise system. And the commission can initiate a policy by drafting it themselves or making a written request to the agency to draft policy. And so what's important to note is that the agency has 14 days to accept or decline. And once an agency accepts, then the commission and the agency have up to 60 days to work on drafting the policy. From there, if either party is not satisfied after the 60 days, the two groups have another opportunity of 30 days to work together in good faith to reach an agreement. Once the commission votes on the policy, then there is up to a 60-day review period for the mayor, and then the policy goes into effect. So those are the very high level with additional details of the policy development process. So as you can see, it is a very collaborative process, as we do want to make sure that we don't overstep some of the expertise that the agencies that we're working with have, and the knowledge that they have that we may not. And so we really come in wanting to listen and work collaboratively to ensure that all voices are heard and we're putting forth the best policy at any given time with what we have available. So if we jump over to the next slide, this is where we want to just talk a little bit about the policy development related to this particular general order. So this was our first attempt at this type of work, right? Like that is very, very important to note that we are in a place where this interim commission is still here, and soon there will be a permanent commission, but this was our first opportunity to really delve into this process. So we are still perfecting it as we learn more and as we grow. And I'm pretty sure once the new commission is in place, they'll continue to perfect this process as well. I really want to highlight that CPD and the commission collaborated well together. There was a lot of openness to the things that we had to share from community. And we were also very open in listening to the concerns that were raised by CPD. The community was engaged and provided a lot of great input, which is, again, why we're here today, because there was additional input even after we voted on this policy that we wanted to make sure we were doing our due diligence of coming back and ensuring that that additional feedback had a way of being incorporated into this policy. So when you think about the former policy, right, the key issue is that it did not really define criminal organization. Also, the old policy didn't mention many of the ways to identify a person as a member. It really only focused on a few options like tattoos, symbols, and informants. Officers also could only be punished for membership in a criminal group only if CPD had already identified that group as criminal. So it was a significant change, and something I'll just highlight for those of you who weren't on the initial webinar we did about this policy is that this policy hadn't been updated since 1997, if I'm recalling that date correctly. And so a little bit about the current policy. The amendment essentially clarifies that the policy applies to criminal and biased organizations. So that was a big shift, right? Because as I stated, it only focused on criminal organizations that had already been identified by the department. So the policy now includes a robust definition of what a criminal and bias-based organization, what those really mean, right? So an officer can be a member of any group that meets the definition, even if that group hadn't previously been identified as prohibited, right? The definition clarifies and expands the definition to encompass hate and terrorist organizations as well. So we're going beyond this idea of it just being criminal, but things where it relates to hate and terrorism, we are also ensuring that those organizations are all encompassed within this policy. So what is the big picture of all of this? We really want to ensure that there's clarity on what groups are prohibited. We really wanted to reduce the emphasis on a list. So again, that it's all encompassing. So whether or not this group has been identified previously, if the behaviors or the actions fall within the definitions outlined in this policy, then that can trigger accountability related to membership in that organization. And there's more focus on the conduct or behavior of an organization's members. And we are also giving more ways to track whether an individual is in a prohibited group. And so before I turn it over to my colleague, Commissioner Loizon, I just really want to emphasize the importance of community input, right? So even though this policy was passed and we will have some additions in the coming months, the Commission, CCPSA's goal is really to continue to elevate and advocate for community voice, which is why we've implemented these sorts of webinars. So for those who may not have had an opportunity to check out the website and read through certain things or didn't get a chance to attend one of our public meetings, this is another platform that we're leveraging just to make sure everyone is aware, informed about our work and sort of how we're navigating this process. And so this is an ongoing process, and the whole reason that a version was passed in January and now it's another revision was that we wanted to incorporate more community voice, and that is what we will continue to do. So really hope that you all stay engaged, and I will stop there and I would turn it over to my colleague, Commissioner Loizon.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so I am now going to jump in on some of the work that we've done on making sure that community is part of this process. And I just want to make sure Remel, give me our slide number so I make sure that I'm not skipping one.
You're in 14. You're in the right
14.
place.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here's where we're at. We got a lot of community feedback from all of you, as Remel said, throughout this entire process, and we did take that community feedback to heart. And I just want to make sure that we review some of the things that we talked to CPD about after the policy was actually voted on by CCPSA and implemented, so that you're aware that we are very committed to a course of continual improvement with respect to these policies. So one of the things that we talked to CPD about was the potential of changing the name of the policy so that it could be more encompassing. But after significant conversation and a lot of feedback from CPD and consideration from Remel and I and our team, we made a determination that the best course of action would be to leave the title as is, because it actually gave us a little bit more leeway and reach in terms of encompassing all of the groups and associations that we wanted to make sure were covered. That was one of the big community pieces of feedback that we received, and we did look into that in depth conversation. But the title has remained the same. One of the other issues that we tackled is in section 3B, we recommended that the policy explicitly state that a criminal or biased organization can be determined not just by the analysis of activity, but also by the analysis of the group's stated mission and values. And that was really important to us, that was incorporated, so that, again, we were not limiting the reach of this policy, but that we could ensure that it applied to all of the conduct that we believe should be prohibited. In 3A5, we sought to clarify which organizations would be considered. And we requested language that talked about organizational mission. And then the fourth thing that we discussed with CPD and sought to modify, based on the community feedback that we received, was a section on policy implementation and monitoring and reporting within the policy. So what we really wanted to see was language contained in the policy that would provide specific guidance on how it was going to be reported out to community and how it was going to be implemented. The biggest addition to the policy, and I just want to highlight that this is extremely important, the biggest addition to the policy was a section on reporting and transparency. And CPD has been extremely cooperative with us in crafting and implementing language into the policy that will ensure that there is regular reporting And that the CCPSA will be able to share that information with community as to how the policy is being utilized, what scenarios have arisen where the policy may have potentially fallen short or maybe needs some different language. We really wanted this reporting to come back to us and be part of the policy so that we could ensure that we were continually able to assess the policy and whether or not it was working appropriately. So I just want to go over the section on reporting and transparency. We are still working on that section with CPD. However, the section includes the following information. The department first and foremost recognized the importance of transparency, and we talked a lot about how transparency is important to building trust. And the department has committed to develop and publishing information to increase transparency. The second thing is that the department is going to develop and electronically publish quarterly reports on its complaint and disciplinary system as entitled, as outlined in its directive, complaint and disciplinary system. And so that, that portion of directive puts the onus on the chief of BIA to ensure that reports are issued that provide data to community about the classification of allegations, the outcomes of those allegations, and also that CPD not only report that information, but they actually utilize that information internally to make sure that they are identifying trends or recurring patterns and ways that they may need to make training recommendations to ensure that their officers are engaging in conduct that complies with policy. There also is an opportunity for that to be specific to areas in the department where maybe it's falling short. So for example, if there's a pattern that is recognized that in a specific district or a specific area of CPD, there are issues that need to be rectified because there's violations of the policy and there's a pattern or trend on that, there can be recommendations for training just to that specific area. The department's annual report will also cover issues on training and will describe the way training has been implemented to speak to this association's order. And the department has made a commitment to regularly review its policies and to seek input from members of the community as they do that. I think that's incredibly important. And I know Remel touched on this before, but I do want to emphasize that the collaboration between CPD and CCPSA's policy team has been, I think, actually like the first of its kind. We've been able to provide so much input and get so much information and have so much collaboration that I don't think CPD has seen before from community. And that all is the result of all of your participation, as well as people coming to our monthly meetings and providing us feedback, sending us emails and providing us feedback. I'm just so excited about the way that this effort has unfolded on this policy. I think it really is a model for going forward. Okay, so policy, we're moving on to the next slide, and it's policy implementation and next steps. So with respect to that, I want to emphasize that this is a new process. And so we are learning as we go. And we certainly want to continue to hear your feedback. But our plan is to establish consistent check-ins with CPD regarding policy implementation. We do not want to find ourselves in a position where we implement a policy and then we forget about it. We don't think that that's the best way to proceed. And I think I've said this a couple times, but we do think it's important that we are continuing to monitor and improve based on the scenarios that are presented to CPD and the scenarios that we learn of through our collaboration with them. We want to make sure that we are utilizing the contacts that district councils have within their communities and all of the feedback that they receive at their monthly community meetings, because they are the boots on the ground. So we want to make sure that as this policy is implemented and we continue to work with CPD, we are updating the district councils on the progress, and we're also hearing their feedback and the feedback of their constituencies on implementation. We are going to be updating our website with information on progress, and also feedback that we receive from CPD, as well as other feedback that we get from communities. And of course, we intend to have more webinars and do additional outreach, and so we can get your feedback regarding this policy and the other policies that, you know, CCPSA is working on and will be working on in the future. One thing that I really want to emphasize here, as I wrap up, is this. We made the determination when we voted on this policy at CCPSA that even though we had heard community feedback and there were certain areas of the policy that people felt should be improved or changed or should be different, we felt it was very important that we vote on the policy and we get it implemented. There was a reason for that, and the reason is that once the policy is in play, if we are doing all the things that we just discussed, keeping in touch with CPD, keeping in touch with community, assessing how the policy is being used, it's the best way for us to mold and shape that policy to be as comprehensive as possible. So with respect to the policy as it stands today, as we've indicated, we still have proposed some changes. We're still talking to CPD about that. Once we are satisfied that all of the edits that we've been discussing provide the appropriate clarifications, we will vote on the policy. I can't tell you when that vote will be today, but it will be soon. And again, I just want to encourage you all one more time to understand and to please participate in giving us continual feedback on this policy and any other policies we're working with, because it is our goal and our intention to ensure that we keep going. We keep going on our review, and we keep going and molding these policies to make sure that they're the best that they can be. Okay. Please use the question and answer feature so that we can answer any questions that you may have. The staff is going to sort those questions, and they're going to ask the commissioners, ask us the relevant questions that have been put into the chat. And you can submit all your comments or feedback by scanning this QR code as well. And thanks again for being a part of this webinar today and for all your time and attention. I think we can go to questions if the staff's ready.
Yep, we're ready. Any questions and answers? If I hope people are able to use that question and answer feature, or they should be able to type into the chat. So we're standing by for questions. And then if you're having trouble with the chat, feel free to either direct message someone, or we can think about figuring out an unmuting feature. Okay, a question just said, sorry if I missed it, but is any draft language about these changes published on your website? And the answer, I can answer that. It is not yet. We just recently got that language, and we will make sure we put that language on our website as soon as we're able. Okay, some of I have a few questions. All right. The language, so Yvette and Remel, here's one question. This is from Jeff Tishauer. or Shower, I'm sorry, Jeff, if I'm mispronouncing your name. The language around a bias organization's mission is often very hard to find, and a lot of these groups use euphemisms that provide plausible deniability. For example, the Proud Boys claim to be a pro-West organization. My question relates to what training will be given to the BCT staff, the Bureau of Counterterrorism staff, on this issue. Remel or Yvette, can you speak to that question, please?
Yeah, I was about to say that's a really great question. We can take that back to CPD to inquire about that, but we don't have like the authority or oversight on how they are training their officers who will be reviewing this. But I do think that that's a really good question, you know, to ensure that they're looking into these things. But I would say from a Proud Boy perspective, right, the policy covers behaviors and actions. So if those members are behaving or participating in certain actions, they can be held accountable regardless of whether or not it's clear in their mission that that's something that they are involved in. So I'll let Yvette share a little bit, but I just want to put that there. We can definitely ask that question, but if their actions are reflective of any of the things in the policy, that's another way for them to be held accountable, whether the mission is clear or not.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And Jeff, thanks for the great question and for all of your participation thus far. The only other thing I would add is this. I think that this is your question goes exactly to why we have implemented those reporting requirements, or we're working to implement them, because we want to make sure that we can have conversations and dialogue with CPD to hear things like, we need to change the language because it's hard to encompass certain conduct based on the fact that they use disguised, words that disguise what they're really doing. And so we would definitely have an opportunity to address that with CPD in the future if they view that as a problem. But as Remel indicated, we really try to ensure that the language that's included in the policy is broad enough that those types of issues should be pretty readily avoidable. But we certainly will address the training piece with CPD.
I have two questions that I'm going to kind of summarize a little bit from someone whose handle is GH. And one question was about whether or not a list of organizations is available, would be made available. And then second, and kind of a follow-up, is would BLM, Black Lives Matter, be considered a terrorist organization, and who is deciding what organizations? And maybe you could just speak to kind of how an organization will be decided upon.
Sure. Organizations will be decided upon based on the definitions that are included in the policy. So if you have an opportunity to review the policy, you will see that the conduct that it's intended to encompass is very specifically identified within the language of the policy. With respect to the list, we have not made a huge push for the list to be published in any way, because it's been our intention to get away from the list being the deciding factor. In fact, we would prefer if CPD only referred to the list as like, the last possible step in a thorough investigation. The goal is for conduct to be assessed based on the very specific definitions that are part of the policy, and the focus is on those definitions. We have literally spent all of the time that we have had working on this policy, refining those definitions and making sure that they encompass the type of conduct that we believe is inappropriate for CPD officers to participate in. So I would just direct you to the definitions in the policy. I think your question would be answered there pretty easily. And I think that it's really important to de-emphasize the list, because that is not going to be the deciding factor at all.
There's another question here. Do you have any stats about how many investigations to this, how many investigations have been conducted thus far to this policy?
Not yet, which is why we were having this opportunity, because that wasn't a part of the policy, right? That's part of the change that we are making to this policy. So in the future, when there is a report out, that information from BIA, someone did ask in the chat, that information, they already publicized their reports. And so you can go there to see whatever existing reports they have. But about this particular one, it's a new policy. So we'll need a little bit of time for it to be out there in order to receive a report from it. But once they make their report, we want access to it. We've established that it'll still be public facing, but in our meetings, when we have that information, we'll make sure it's on our agenda to communicate publicly to everyone.
Also, I just want to note that the policy went into effect. Cody, help me out here, but it was January. I don't know
January
the
12th.
exact. Thank you.
January 12th
January
of this
12th.
year.
Right. So at this juncture, I think it would be difficult to have stats on the policy being utilized because the investigative process would generally take longer than the policy has been in effect. So we certainly hope to report on that, down the line, as Remel indicated.
Thank you, commissioners. At this point, we don't have any open questions, and there's been no further questions in the chat. I will say the most current policy, the one that was just enacted on January 12th, there's a link in the chat to that current policy that is now in operation. We have one more question here. This is from Pastor Rich Redman. Pastor Redmond has been inquiring of CPD's hiring practices, and he's talking about how this policy is related to hiring practices. I'm trying to see that. Sorry, there's more of a, what can CCPSA do about correcting this practice? Okay, sorry. Mayor Manuel ran on hiring new police recruits that reflect the communities in which they serve. I've yet to see this policy implemented. What can CCPSA do about correcting this practice? Pastor Redmond, I'm not sure if he means specific to this policy, but I pose it to both of you commissioners to reflect on it more broadly or specific to this policy.
Sure. Remel, do you want to go ahead? You want me to start?
You can start, and then I can.
Okay, so one thing I just want to be clear on is that CCPSA does not have direct oversight over CPD's recruitment or handling of recruits. And when they're weeding out recruits, there's an appeals process that actually goes through the police board. So while we do have authority and oversight over the police board, we don't have direct authority on that recruitment process. All that being said, CPD would certainly consider this policy as part of their recruitment policy insofar as they should not be hiring CPD officers who have engaged in conduct that would be contrary to the language in this policy. So the fact that like an officer isn't completely sworn in doesn't negate this policy. The policy would still apply, and the purpose of the policy to ensure that the ranks of CPD are not filled with people who have these types of associations certainly is in play in the onboarding process. But this policy shouldn't be used as a mechanism for not permitting CPD to diversify its ranks. And that was one of the things that we discussed at length with CPD when we were crafting language in this policy. We wanted to make sure that, for example, like the gang affiliation component of it was not going to preclude diverse members of the community who wanted to participate as CPD officers from having an opportunity to do that. And that's why we spent a lot of time making sure that the definitional language in the policy was very specific so that it wouldn't be over-inclusive and thus prohibitive of members reflecting the community actually becoming CPD officers.
Thank you for that. And I would just add, like, just to echo some of the sentiments about, we don't have that type of oversight over their hiring. If anything, if we saw that there was some level of concern, we could have, conversations or, have just personally as a person who cares about it to suggest like solutions to how they could better do recruiting. But we as a commission have no authority or oversight over their hiring and recruitment practices. So because I think at the gist of that question is what it was about. So hopefully that answers the question that we don't have that authority as a commission.
One more thing I would just add though, Pastor Richmond, if you go to the CCPSA website, you will see that there is CPD goal setting documentation in that website. And it's the goals that were set collaboratively with CPD and the commission for the upcoming year. Those goals require quarterly updates from CPD through the commission on how they're achieving their goals. There is language in those goals that talks about the recruitment process and the diversification of, CPD's police officers. So I would encourage you to maybe take a look at those goals and the schedule for updating with respect to those goals, because that should provide some insight into what I understand your concern to be. That might be a more helpful mechanism.
Commissioners Terry and Loizon, we have no more open questions and nothing in the chat. We do have the policy posted in the chat, and someone asked if this presentation could be emailed. I'll certainly look for the person who asked the question to email them the presentation, but it will also be posted on our social media. So we're at the end of it at this point. Commissioners, I'll let you wrap up.
Again, I just want to thank you all for your engagement. Thank you for your continuous participation. Please stay connected with us. Feel free after this, if you think of something, to reach out to either of us or the commission in general. We really do take into consideration, what community has to say. And we think of community as everyone. So even if there are officers that are on this call, we would love to hear your feedback as well related to this policy. We're really intentional about that, and we're hoping that with this new iteration of the commission that they are truly intentional about that, because the best way for us to move forward in this work is together. So again, thank you all for your time.
Yes, thank you so much. And I also just want to say that in the work that we've done on the commission for the past 18 months, I think that the work we've done on this policy has been an example and like a template that the commission, can follow into the future about how to provide real community feedback to CPD that is actually then implemented into policy. So it's really just amazing to me to watch this process unfold. I love that the fact that the community has had so much input on this particular policy, and I hope that you will all stay as engaged as you have been to ensure that this is how policy making is done going forward. So thank you so much for all your time and attention, and we're really thrilled that you all took the time to join us today. I think that'll do it.
Have a great rest of your afternoon. Happy Monday.
Bye, everybody.